morning, Bob. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, good morning, Chris. And who would have thought here we are 18 months on, still talking on the phone in this way?
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? But I think it's very apt that we talk today because there are obviously more and more calls, again, beginning to come out about people asking for government to do more to support industry.
Yes, and I think it's right that there are calls for support, but I think you've always got, if it is support, it's got to be what I term focused support, which will actually make a difference. And secondly, having been the other side of the fence when I was sort of at DCMS and whatever, one does have to understand what is the role of using government money and the different calls on government money. And, we know at the moment, whether it's for helping care workers, getting care right, helping the NHS, youngsters in schools who haven't had good schooling in the last 18 months. There are an awful lot of calls on the government coffers at the moment. So, we're in a long line. So any case we make has got to be justified, and it's got to be for, as it were, the long-term good of the country, not just for individuals.
Yeah, I agree on that. But I suppose my question to you is, doesn't the industry also need to do more to get its own message out?
Well, it does, and I have to say at the moment, I'm struggling to hear coherent messages, for the hospitality sector as a whole, or even for the subsets within it, hotels, restaurants, contract catering, leisure, nightclubs, because they've all got particular issues, as it were, but I'm failing to hear any coherent stories and messages other than the universal one that we're short of staff.
And that shortage of staff is probably a deeper problem than many realise.
Well, exactly, and I still take the view that is down to industry to a very large extent. Recruiting people, training people, developing people, keeping your people, motivating them and managing them. That is the role of, companies, managers within the industry. That is the responsibility of industry, and not really the responsibility of government. All one can ask of government is that there is opportunity for people to be trained in the right way and to have financial support for that.
Well, I think there's two parts to this, isn't there? I mean, first, I think it's important to point out, as we discussed before we came onto this, is this is all the same trend is happening in North America and in Europe as well.
Well, it's almost identical. I mean, it's fascinating that it does appear to be what I term a developed economies problem, i.e., North America and Canada, Britain and the whole of Western Europe, where for some reason, after 18 months plus of the pandemic, large swathes of young people have decided that they don't want to either return to the hospitality sector or work in the hospitality sector. So it appears to be an issue that's come out of the pandemic in developed economies. And of course, because Britain is sort of 80% a service-related economy, it has hit us probably worse than almost anyone else.
But again, it goes back to the same piece. We don't make a strong enough argument, do we?
Well, that is the point I'm making. As I say, I really haven't heard strong, coherent arguments, coming from the hospitality sector about what it is, one, they think they can do for themselves, and two, where they can work with government to try and find solutions to this problem.
So why do you think that's the case?
I suspect there is a little bit of, there has been so much going on over the last few months, and things are changing almost weekly, that people are sort of tied down looking after their own business, that sort of they're not getting together collectively to look at the bigger, wider picture.
That's been the case but since your days at BHA. I mean, you brought the industry together very well when you were the BHA, but...
Well, there's two ways of bringing people together. Yes, you've got to connect people, but I also think you've got to go out and meet people. Yes, modern technology is great. I mean, we're doing this, sort of by, the aid of modern technology, we're having this discussion. And it's great to be able to connect people to an extent by modern technology. But I really think that part of the job is getting out, meeting people, and winning hearts and minds to a collective approach. And if I look at some of the great leaders of the past of our sector, we were talking earlier, the Gary Hawkeses of this world, the Jerry Robinsons, the Charles Fortes, etc., they all had this ability to go out and persuade people and win hearts and minds of people to a collective approach. And I think that is what we need a little bit at the moment, is getting out and persuading people to have a collective approach about what we need to do as an industry. Yeah, and I think it's quite difficult to do that in online Zoom communications.
Well, I suppose that's the point, isn't it? Communication's got harder, but we've got to work harder on how we get a message across.
Well, that's right. But you actually do have to win hearts and minds. It's not just about sending out messages or sending out instructions or sending out information. You've actually got to win hearts and minds for people to change their views or to come round to a different view or think about things differently. It's that winning hearts and minds piece, which is the art of communication, but actually also the most difficult part of communication.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think you kind of touched on it earlier. I think the kind of feedback I'm getting is that companies are so caught up in themselves, they're not working as a whole.
Well, that's exactly the point. And I do understand that because, there are, extreme, it's about survival for many companies. And, that is the most important thing, is how do I get through this week? How do I get through this month? Conversations with the bank, is the cash going to last, etc., etc. They're fighting for survival, so many of them, because even with business now open to an extent, it's probably only running at 60 to 75%, and for many businesses that's still not enough to be profitable. So they're not in what I term positive cash flow territory. So many are still in survival mode, and that's why I think they're sort of looking for their own survival rather than, as it were, thinking of the bigger, wider picture. And I think that is where I look for the bigger companies and the leaders of the bigger companies to come together, because they have the deeper pockets and the stronger balance sheets, some of them.
Now, obviously,
I mean, if you look at the large groups, and I'm talking about the Marriotts, the IHGs, Premier, Whitbread Group, those, they've got very strong balance sheets and deep pockets, and they should be able to be coming together and be taking a long-term view both for their company and the sector, and how they can come together to help.
But we need to think differently, don't we? Because one of the things you've touched on with this is that the pandemic has probably changed things in quite fundamental ways, including how talent view the industry. And there's probably
I think that is where we have to do the fundamental thinking needs to come in, because it has changed things, and we have to recognise that. So how can we change that thinking? I mean, I was just sort of thinking myself this morning before this conversation. I think you have to sort of break it down in a sub-sectorial way for hospitality. And I'm reminded, if I look at contract food service, for example, it takes me all the way back to the role and the work of the Industrial Society in the 70s, which spent all their time about promoting the benefits of subsidized feeding at work. And I see some of the bigger companies in London are exactly rolling out that approach, i.e. to encourage their workers to come back to work in London. They're giving free food. They're giving a great lunch opportunity in safe surroundings. It's a meeting place for people to be able to meet safely, albeit 3 days a week. But it's full circle about how important it is the lunch facility in these working places, to have a great lunch in a safe place and have it in a subsidized manner, which is, a sort of going back 20, 30 years. But that's the way that sector can, as it were, refind itself for a successful future. And I think that restaurant groups, hotel groups, hotel sector, different subsectors are going to have to do similar things to say, well, how can we make our offering relevant to the customer, make sure that it is what I term a good value offer to the customer, and then how can we actually focus on getting the staff that we need to work in our particular sector, whether it's a hotel or a restaurant. And that may well be in the restaurant sector not being open 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. It may well be looking at 1 or 2 days a week, which aren't the busy days of the week, closing partly, make sure that we can be available. A whole range of things we've got to start thinking differently. Or how can we start collecting staff, bring them into work to help subsidizing their travel costs, for example, or bonuses for coming into work so many days a month, or whatever. We've got to somehow sweeten the employment package to make it more attractive, but still keep within a profitable environment.
Look, I agree. And actually, it goes back to the talent piece, because actually we do need, cause over the last 20 years, we have seen a real decline, haven't we, in the investment of talent and the opportunity for talent to come through.
Well, exactly that. And why was that? Because it was so easy, as it were, to keep sort of replacing staff rather than worry about developing staff. And, now the boot is exactly on the opposite foot, that those companies, and there are some good examples, that did actually spend time investing in local people, then developing that talent and keeping it with them. They're the ones now that are actually flourishing. So it is about attracting people and then spending money and developing them. And I think I've always said to you, Chris, I have this rule of thumb that an absolute minimum 1% of payroll costs should be spent on training and developing your staff. Absolutely. And very, very, very few people actually aspire to that level.
Even that is half of what it used to be in the 80s and 90s.
Well, that's right. But we've got to start somewhere. So that's what I say. I would make it a clear target, 1%. And one thing we could do with government, I would like government to, as it were, incentivize that, so that if a company is spending 1% on developing its staff, great. If it spends more than 1% on developing its staff, perhaps it can get a reduction of its national insurance bill. And if it doesn't spend 1%, perhaps it should be penalized on its national insurance bill. Very easy to use the tax system, particularly NI, to incentivize companies to do the right thing.
Now, one of the things you would be talking about is the need to think differently. Now, one of the frustrations I know for a lot of people as they come back is they feel that companies aren't thinking any differently. What's your sense?
Well, I think that is almost certainly the case in the very short term, because I say, most managements of companies, senior managements of companies are still in survival mode, and perhaps it's going to take probably 3 or 4 months right through till perhaps next year, beginning of next year, to come out of survival thinking. If we can carry on as we are, September, October, November, December, business gradually returning, and it was great to see what's going on in London in this week. I think there's been a much higher level of activity in London than there has been for sort of 18 months. So if we can build on this, people returning to their normal workplace, hospitality businesses beginning to pick up more business during the autumn, if we can get through till Christmas without any more major disruptions or lockdowns or restrictions, I think next year people will start to be able to sort of think more about the future in a more creative, positive way than still be in survival mode. And I do understand, I think at the moment it's still survival mode and likely to be survival mode for the next 3 or 4 months.
It's interesting that actually the events companies are actually beginning to say that their figures for Q4 are ahead of 2019 levels, which is encouraging. The interesting
well, that's what I'm saying is I'm hearing from lots of places that things are starting to be encouraging, albeit they're still a fair way away from where things were in 2019. If we look at that as that sort of the last complete base year. But as I say, things are moving in the right direction, and that is why I was saying if we can have 3 or 4 more months of stability, shall we say, and people getting their confidence back as much as anything else, because I think it's not just customers who've had their confidence knocked for 6. It's management's had its confidence. Its workers have had their confidence. Everyone's confidence has been shaken to an extent about, the predictability about the future. Things changed by the week. I mean, who would have ever imagined 2 years ago that we will have gone through the 18 months that we've gone through? You just could not have imagined or predicted anything like this. So I think it has hit people's confidence to an extent about how they can, see the future and plan for the future. And they need a few months, I think, to come through that process and regain their confidence to start taking positive decisions about what can we now do to the future to make a difference, because we do have to get to that frame of mind that we have it within our grasp to make changes for the positive, for the future. You always have to believe that you can, you have to have a can-do feeling and a can-do approach, and not that you're in a helpless situation. And we've got to get to that on the front foot can-do approach.
No, look, I agree on that. So what's your sense of how things are going to play out over the next 6 months? Can I ask?
I think there are 2 issues. One is I really hold my fingers crossed very tightly that we can get through the autumn till Christmas without actually having to have any more restrictions. And whilst I see the number of cases obviously pretty high and going up daily, I think the key is looking at the hospital admissions and those in ICU. And fortunately, the hospital admissions and the ICU numbers appear to be, whilst they're going up really very slowly. And I think that is all due to the success of the vaccination program. If we can get through to Christmas without any disruptions to business, I think that will be a big plus. And by that time, I think we'll start to see some confidence emerging from business and its leaders about how they can now start making plans for the future to adjust to the new way of customers reacting, what is required by the customer, even what is value for money, because I have to say I am a little concerned at the moment that the price increases I'm seeing both in hotels and restaurants across the board, particularly outside London and in the rural regional areas, may actually scare off customers for the future when customers feel they've got a choice of going overseas again. And we really have to be mindful of that a lot of people may be, having a good business run at the moment in hotels and restaurants outside the city areas. They've got to remember that the success of business is about having long-term business and long-term relationship with your customers. And you don't want customers to feel that they've been overcharged this year, and when they have a choice next year, they will go elsewhere.
I think that is very fair. I mean, I've noticed in London, actually, I reckon restaurant bills have probably gone up 30%, which I understand why.
Well, I would say that's about what I'm finding, certainly in Sussex and around here, particularly at the better end of the market. I'm finding restaurant prices up 30% plus. Hotel prices, obviously, well, it's the summer season and staycations, but they're obviously, pretty top end. And I just feel that a lot of people will remember these prices, and when they come to be booking next year, and if they're able to go overseas next year, and they start comparing the quality, the price of a reasonable quality overseas package with what they paid this year, they might start making decisions about, well, let's go overseas for next year, and that may come as a nasty shock to the domestic market next year. So we really don't want to be killing the goose.
Yeah, no, I accept that. But at the same time, there's been some very good feedback on staycations. People have actually really enjoyed it.
And Visit Britain have been very quick to say, and if nothing else, I think it's made so many people realize that actually what we have in this country is a great tourism offer. I know it's trite, but when you look at the scenery, the activities, the hotels, the restaurants, a whole range of things, we have a great offer here for tourists, and maybe a lot of our domestic homegrown people haven't realized what a great offer there is in this country, whereas this year they will have been appreciating it. I just hope that we get the value for money against the experience equation right, and too many people don't feel that they've been overcharged for their experience.
Right, let me just put you on the spot a bit. So we talked about leaders needing to be out there and winning hearts and minds. Which leaders have impressed you during this period?
I have to say, under all the difficulties, I think Kate Nicholls has done a great job at UK hospitality under extremely difficult circumstances. I think Hospitality Action have done a great job on the charity side, and I think more recently I'm beginning to see good work from Springboard about getting young people to experience something in this industry. But what I'm failing to see is what I term much corporate leadership, because I think at the end of the day, it's a very strong message to get senior hoteliers, senior restaurateurs, senior contract caterers, to get them collectively singing off the same hymn sheet would be a much more powerful message than just the trade associations and the other bodies. It should be a joint approach, and if anything, the hospitality sector has been left on the what should I say, the corporate side. It's been left to people like Robin Hudson et al., who's been a great advocate, I think, to sort of carry the message. And yet he's a relatively small player when you look at the size of his business compared to some of the giants of our sector.
I think that's very fair. And I think that is the challenge, isn't it? I mean, this is an interesting one. It's part of the debate, isn't it? Because your era, as I call it, that group was much better at working together.
Well, they were. As I say, I go back to when I was fortunate to have people like David Michel's, John Jarvis, Rocco Forte, Donald McDonald, John Wilson from M&C, Francis Mackay, Gary Hawkes, Bill Toner, etc. All of them I could call upon to help me putting a message across. And they were very good at, if something came up on the radio or television, I could take a view, well, this is something either I could handle, or I think the message might be stronger if it comes from a corporate person, because sometimes that's the judgment you make. It sounds more convincing coming from a company than it is from a trade association, and that was the way I played it. And all those people were extremely good, very articulate at making the case, and they didn't do it just for their individual company. They did it for the industry, and I think that's the point I'm making. Alan Parker, another one who at that time who was excellent from Whitbread. I could call upon Alan any time, and whilst he would get the word Whitbread into his conversation, he would actually speak on behalf of the industry. And that is what we need, is these players of the bigger companies to step forward and speak collectively on behalf of the industry.
Look, I agree on that. I absolutely agree. Bob, can I thank you for your time this morning? It's been excellent talking to you.
No, thank you, Chris, and let's hope we can continue it, but I really do hope that we can sort of get face-to-face soon, because whilst it's nice listening to your dulcet tones over the airwaves, as it were, there's nothing beats face-to-face activity.
I do look forward to seeing you, Bob. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks for your time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.